Hi Year 10, this time we are looking at this text from a novel called 1984. It's written by a guy called George Orwell. Now previously we focused on a specific question. This time we are going to look at this text for question 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, so you might just want to write yourself a reminder that question 2 is the language question. Question 3 is the structure question, and question 4 is the evaluation question. Now, as you'll probably remember, question 1 often asks us about the first bit of the text, and then question 2 often asks you about the second bit. So we're going to focus on this paragraph for language, and we're going to be looking at how the writer uses language to describe the scene. So I'll read this bit, but we're not actually going to make any annotations, and then we will read this bit as well. Source A. This extract is from the opening of a dystopian novel by George Orwell. Now you should remember already from when we looked at this right at the beginning of the year, this idea we've got a utopian where everything is perfect, or a dystopian society where we see the reverse of that, the kind of a negative view of society. Where everything is going wrong, the kind of place where you wouldn't want to live. In this section, the main character, Winston, is returning home from a day at work at the Ministry of Truth. It was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. So already you should be thinking, well, hang on, that's not right. Clocks don't strike 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. Now we can think straight away about the effect of this. So the writer is definitely using our senses to help us imagine it. Boiled cabbage and old rag mats. We've got the adjectives and the nouns here, creating a negative impression. This is somewhere that you don't want to be. But also there's a sense of poverty here. Cabbage is a very cheap food, and historically, people would sort of make soup out of cabbage if that was all they had. And rag mats is literally making carpets, making rugs out of old rags. So the nouns here as well are suggesting a sense of poverty. Now, whilst we're writing about this paragraph here, we can still make links to elsewhere in the text. We don't want to get into too much detail about that, but actually showing our understanding of the text as a whole and how this fits in context is going to help. So for me, the fact that it's so negative really is in contrast and juxtaposes the fact that this place is called Victory Mansions. We think of victory has connotations of success and of winning, and mansions kind of connote something grand. So we've got a juxtaposition between these two paragraphs here. Now this is not really about structure, this is about language, because we're talking about the words that are used, the different words in these two paragraphs. So we're still focusing on the hallway here. At one end of it, a coloured poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face more than a metre wide, the face of a man about 45, with a heavy black moustache and ruggedly handsome features. Now there's a few things that are strange here. The poster is too large, which implies that it shouldn't be there. And this is also emphasised by the fact that it's been tacked to the wall. If you tack something to the wall, I'm going to have to put my notes right over here. It's not permanent. And these two kind of ideas together are working to create a sense that this poster shouldn't be here. It seems possibly strange or out of place. Or maybe like it doesn't belong. Maybe it's a recent addition. So we've got this face of a man more than a metre wide. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working. Seldom means hardly. So if you want to note that, or rarely might be better word rather than hardly. So it was rarely working. And at present, the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. Now, there's a lot going on here in terms of ideas. The fact that it says it was no use, we've got Winston's sort of view here, implies that this is typical. This sense of typicality, it's normal. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer on his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. Now this is interesting here. The poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. This verb here, gazed, gives us the impression that this almost makes the poster seem real, or the face on the poster seem real. It's as if it is watching Winston, really. Or spying on him in some way. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. So this phrase is also kind of reinforcing this idea of this sort of sense of spying. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. So we've got this idea here of being watched is reinforced. So we've got gazed, we've got eyes, we've got watching. Now remember, when you've got words that kind of link on a particular theme or topic, we call this a semantic field. And this semantic field of sort of spying or being watched is here. It creates a very sinister tone at this point, because this is just a poster, and yet it seems to be spying on Winston. Okay, there's plenty of things that we could say about Winston here, but the question is asking us to describe the scene. I guess he's part of the scene. It's not asking us to describe the setting, so we could look at that as well. Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer. So like varicose veins are kind of like bulging bits, but bulging veins. But here we've got an ulcer as well. Above his right ankle, went slowly. So again, this kind of detail here is quite graphic. It's definitely very visual description. Which creates a sense of pain and struggle, which is reinforced here by the adverb slowly and the verb resting, suggesting that this is difficult for him. Okay, now let's have a think about the structure. So I'm going to swap to a different colour pen so that you can see my notes on structure. And we'll start by reading again, because obviously remember, for the structure you have to write about the text as a whole and how it interests you as a reader. Really remember what this question is asking you to do is summarize what the text is about, how it begins, how it changes as it goes on in the middle, and what's different by the end. All right, so you're thinking about this text on a paragraph by paragraph basis, and you're looking at what each paragraph focuses on. And remember, even to get half marks, you need to be able to quote and use terminology. And then that sort of making connections between each paragraph is how we get further on. So let's go back to the first paragraph, and we're thinking about structure now. It was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. Now remember, this is the opening of a novel, so that's going to be significant as well. What we're seeing here is the writer straight away establishing the setting. So we might want to use this quotation if we were writing about the beginning. So at the beginning we could be saying the writer is establishing the setting. So we've got not just a sense of time, but we've also got a sense of place, because it goes on to talk about Winston going through the doors of Victory Mansions. But we've got, although we've got this sort of very traditional way of starting, it was a bright cold day in April, and that's contrast and juxtaposed with this sense of abnormality with the 13. I suppose we better not get too much into language. So if we start off by saying he is establishing the setting, the time, and the place where he's talking about Victory Mansions, and it seems to start in a very traditional way. And I guess what he's trying to do here is suggest a sense of normality, which actually we know is not going to be the case, because we know that this is going to be a dystopian novel. So we can write about what it focuses on in the beginning. We know what quotation we are going to use. We're going to be using structural language in terms of talking about the features that are being established here: time, place, setting, and then we're thinking about the effect. Now we've read this paragraph, so we don't really need to move on in terms of reading it in detail. We just need to think about what this paragraph focused on. So straight away it starts with the hallway. We can see then that we have moved from the outside, the exterior, to the interior. So we can say here that we've got, I'm going to put a little star actually and a number 1 and write my notes up here. So this paragraph, it shifts, remember our structural vocab, from the exterior of Victory Mansions to the interior. And if we think about what's going on here, it's not just describing the hallway, but it seems to zoom in the second half on this poster. In actual fact, this poster comes back, doesn't it? So we've got the poster mentioned here, and then we've got the poster mentioned at the end of this paragraph as well, the poster. So it shifts from the exterior to the interior, but it's zooming in on the poster. It seems to have some kind of particular significance that we're yet to find out. The fact that we've moved into the hallway as well suggests that we're kind of following this main character, Winston, because he's just entered the building. So the other thing that you might want to note here is, although it's a third-person narrative, we seem to be following the main character, Winston. So you can put third-person narrative, but actually it's still from Winston's perspective as we're following him into the building. And again, this helps to establish him as one of the main characters. So this kind of idea of establishing character that we also get actually, don't we? Because the character is introduced in this first paragraph. we still find out a little bit more of him in paragraph 2. Okay, so we need to carry on reading because we haven't actually read the rest of it. So let's look at paragraph 3. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. The voice came from an oblong metal plaque like a dulled mirror, which formed part of the surface of the right-hand wall. Winston turned a switch and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still indistinguishable. The instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. He moved over to the window, a smallish, frail figure, the meagreness of his body merely emphasised by the blue overalls, which were the uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades and the cold of the winter that had just ended. So again we move then from the hallway to inside the flat. So again we're still following Winston, but the setting and the focus have changed. The focus in the first half of this paragraph seems to be quite a lot to do with sound. Now again, remember, we can't talk about language, but we're trying to kind of give a summary. So we've got the voice and the voice and the voice and so on and so on. It could be dim, but there was no shutting it off completely. So it focuses very much in the first half on the sounds inside the flat. And then it moves to focusing onto Winston as he moves towards the window. Smallish, frail, blah, 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 blah. So all of this is focusing on the physical description of Winston. So it's moving in a very kind of controlled fashion from outside to the hallway to inside the flat, and then here where it's focusing on Winston, again we can say it's zooming in, or we can say it shifts to try and use some of that structural language. Then look at the next paragraph. Now straight away we can see that the focus has changed again. The setting has changed. So we're now moving from the interior to the exterior. It's the setting that has changed. Outside, even through the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Down in the street, little eddies of wind were whirling dust and torn paper into spirals, and though the sun was shining and the sky harsh blue, there seemed to be no colour in anything, except the posters. Oh, hang on. That should make us think about a connection, because previously, in paragraph 2, we had a lot of talk about the posters. So let's just mark that for now. Except the posters that were plastered everywhere. The black mustachioed face, we had him as well, this guy with the black moustache, gazed down. Now, you might notice that the language is similar, and we can't talk about language. There was one on the house front immediately opposite. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said. So again, we've got that same phrase, while the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own. Down at street level, another poster, torn at one corner, flapped fitfully in the wind. So again, it's all focusing on the posters and in covering the single word, Ingsoc. In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for a distance like a blue bottle, darted away again with a curving flight. It was the police patrols snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. Now, if we think of this paragraph as a whole, remember what we're trying to do is pick out, well, what is the main thing that it's about? It's about the outside, but essentially it's focusing back on this idea of the posters. Now, remember when you've got an idea that repeats throughout a piece in order to kind of bring it together, we call that a motif. So this black mustachioed man, the idea of Big Brother and the poster itself are now becoming a motif. Now we need to think, in order to get those higher marks, about making a connection. So previously the poster was on the inside the building. Now the posters are on the outside of the building, and we can see them outside. So it seems to be that Orwell is trying to create this impression that the posters are everywhere. And just in the way, when we can't talk about language, but we can talk about the ideas, just in the same way that the posters are watching us, we don't seem to be able to get away from them. So neither the reader nor the characters can get away from them. So we're being put in the same kind of situation as Winston here, because he feels that these posters are watching him, but we can't escape them either. So now we're really starting to think about some interesting structural techniques. If you were writing this up for an essay, you might want to focus on paragraph 1 and 3 very, very briefly, but you'd really be focusing on paragraph 2 and how the poster is introduced there, and then in the middle looking at the idea of the motif and how it is the focus has changed to the outside, but this idea that the posters are still there. Remember, you don't need to write about every single paragraph. You do just need to write about the beginning, the middle and the end. Now let's look at paragraph 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I must get more into the habit of doing this. So if you haven't done it, go back and number your paragraphs and number this one, paragraph 5. Behind Winston's back came the voice from the telescreen, which was still babbling away about the pig iron. Okay, so we're now back inside. So it kind of switches back to the interior here. We're back inside the flat. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telescreen was still babbling away about pig iron and the overfulfillment of the ninth three-year plan. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision with the metal plaque he commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. Now, we had these things described before. We had the telescreen described in paragraph 3, but this time there seems to be a connection between Winston and the things that were being described before. So if we just go back to remind ourselves here, the first half described these voices and sounds, and the second half described Winston. Now we've got them kind of coming together. So we've got the idea of the voice again, but actually we now can see that these sounds are also affecting Winston. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained in the field of vision, which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. So now we've got the sense that he's almost being watched and listened into. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was inconceivable that they watched everybody all the time, but at any rate they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, did live, from habit that became indistinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, except in darkness, every movement scrutinised. So, let's look at what's going back on here. So the way it switches from the outside to the inside and then the outside to the inside, it's almost like we're being watched as well. This kind of like focus on what's going on outside, what's going on inside. How can we kind of describe that? So we want to try and explain this idea that Winston feels like he's being watched, but the fact that it keeps swapping between the interior and exterior and the way that it's structured makes us as the reader feel like we're the ones watching him. So if we go back to what we wrote at the beginning, we said that we were seeing things from Winston's perspective, and it was like we were following him. We follow him into the building, and then we follow him into the flat, and then when he starts looking outside, we start looking outside, and then again we're following him here. So this shifts in setting and the way the reader sort of follows Winston, we could say reflects the way that he feels like he's being watched. So we also need to remember, make sure that we're using quotations just to support this. So we need something that reinforces, or we can use as evidence that he feels like he's being watched. So it says it was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. So you could have that whole quotation, that whole sentence, or you could just have they watched everybody all the time. Okay, so the way that we follow him around, it's almost like if you were imagining this as a film, the focus would be on Winston the whole time. He would be in shot the whole time. We follow him into the building, we follow him up the stairs, we follow him into the flat, he moves to the window, and we're almost it would almost be like an over-the-shoulder shot. We'd be seeing things from his point of view. So this is kind of really key here. We've also got this idea of the things that were separate before, the voices and then Winston are coming together. So if you want to make notes on that as well, you can. So remember here we said we had the sounds and then we had the physical description of Winston. And now the sounds and Winston have been kind of interlinked, I guess. And this kind of this idea of them being kind of together reinforces this idea that Winston feels that he can't get away from anything. He can't escape. And again, we would need a quotation to back that up. So we could have that bit where it says, any sound that Winston made above a very low whisper would be picked up, would be a good one. Or he could be seen as well as heard. So these ideas of sounds have taken on a greater significance here, because any sound that Winston makes can be listened into. Okay, so there's quite a lot there in terms of structural features. You wouldn't have time to write about all of that. You've got to pick what you want to write about most. So you might want to write about this paragraph 4 is something in the middle, and then you might not write about paragraph 5, or you might write about paragraph 5 and not paragraph 4, because you need to write about the beginning, the middle, and the end. You might have time to write about it all, but you've obviously got to stick within the time constraints of the question. So let's turn over and look up the end, I guess. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though as well he knew even a back can be revealing. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought, was with a sort of vague distaste. This was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with baulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard and their roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all direction? And the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and willow herbs straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch and there had sprung up sordid colonies of wood dwellings like chicken houses. But it was no use. He could not remember. Nothing remained of his childhood except a series of bright lit tableaux occurring against no background and mostly unintelligible. Okay, so we're focused on Winston now. We're still inside. but we know that he's back to looking out of the window because he's telling us what he can see. So again, we've got this swap from, remember, we were on the outside and then we went to the inside, and now we're on the inside but looking out again. All right. So the focus starts on Winston. So it starts here, sorry. With Winston looking out of the window. And we know this because we can see what he sees. He's describing London and the city out there. But essentially what most of this paragraph is about is seeing things from Winston's perspective. So we've now really gone kind of inside Winston's mind. We can see his thoughts and what he's thinking. Now, again, this is an interesting shift at this point because we know from previously that we've got this idea of the thought police. So again, just remind yourself, turn back to paragraph 4, only the thought police mattered. And now every sound he made can be overheard. So the fact that we at this point have moved inside his mind, again, makes us, as the reader, like the thought police. We are privy to kind of his thoughts and his feelings. So the focus has shifted again, even though we've already focused on Winston and we've already focused on what he can see from the outside. Now again, this time the focus here is, whilst it's on his thoughts and feelings, it's this sense of things again being confusing and not what they seem. And then finally, it zooms in again on this idea of the ministry of truth. So the Ministry of Truth, Ministru in Newspeak. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania. Then for an account of its structure and etymology, see appendix, was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up terrace after terrace, 300 metres into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out in its white face in elegant lettering, the 3 slogans of the party. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Now this paragraph zooms further and further in. So we've got a much tighter focus here on a specific building, the Ministry of Truth, which is described. But again, we know we're seeing this from Winston's perspective. So we're still always kind of seeing and watching things over his shoulder. And then it kind of zooms in even into the tightest focus, where it really zooms in on this bit at the end, this kind of message or caption or slogan that's on the side of this building. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And the way it moves from describing London to then zooming in on a building and then zooming in on this particular phrase here, it's almost like it's building to a climax. Which is then emphasizing the significance of these words for us at this point. So that gives you a bit of a summary in terms of structure and, you know, some keywords, a look at what each paragraph focuses in on, an opportunity to apply your subject terminology and quotations that you may want to use. You may also notice other things about structure, you know, when you start looking at the text like this. So by all means, add them on. We're now going to turn back and do our final bit, which is looking at evaluation. Okay, so question 4, evaluation. It may be that you want to make notes on a separate sheet by this point, because if you're anything like me, you'll have filled the page with notes. So by all means, at this point, use a different sheet, make some notes in your book or something like that, or on a separate piece of paper. So remember, on the evaluation question, we always get a quotation, not from the text, but from another person about what they think. And then we have to say, to what extent do we agree? The idea here is this, that we look for evidence that we agree, but we also look for evidence that we might think something else. So this is the the quotation that I'm going to give you. Orwell presents a worrying picture of society. And then you would have to say, to what extent do you agree? So what we're really focusing on is whether society, whether this place is being, and it's not just setting, but everything about it is being presented as worrying. So we've got to think, well, should we be worried about this? Does this, or should Winston be worried about this? Does this seem strange or dodgy or concerning in some way? But we might also be thinking about, well, what else do we think about the way society is being presented? Now, remember, you'll nearly always have to focus on the second half of the text. So you'll have focused on the first bit for question 1, the second bit on question 2. And we're going to start with this paragraph 5, all right? So we're focusing from here for question 4. So let's reread and let's pick out everything that we think seems worrying. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telly screen was still babbling away about pig iron and the over-fulfillment of the 9th 3-year plan. That doesn't seem that worrying. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Well, again, we might think that doesn't seem that worrying. So actually, just as we did with the kite runner text, we want to be saying that actually at this point we disagree. We have things in our pockets, in our bags, that receive and transmit simultaneously, our phones. So the way that society, the way that this kind of place is being presented at this point, to a modern reader doesn't seem that worrying. At this point, we've got a sense of things seeming very normal. It's not worrying. It's not even unusual at this point, as this is what our phones do. Probably a lot of us have the TV on in the background, so the telescreen's still babbling away. Again, actually is not worrying. At this point, to a modern reader, it would actually be very familiar. You may want to focus on language, because remember, you get marks, and a vital part of this question is about analysing the methods as well. So you could say, whilst this does seem familiar, actually when we start to look at the language, the fact that the telescreen is described as babbling away maybe is a sign that it is slightly worrying, because it makes the TV almost seem human, and it kind of elevates its importance in some way. So this is almost like, in terms of methods, we might want to talk about the personification here. Of the TV. Now we know as well, and again this is, although we're writing about this bit, we can make connections. Whilst it does seem familiar and normal and not unusual here, if we look back to what we were told previously, we were told that there was no way of shutting it off completely. So actually, although we're writing about this bit here, we could still write about how this knowledge that we've got from earlier on in the text does suggest that actually maybe we should be worried about this telescreen. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Well, that definitely seems worrying. Okay, I'll use a highlighter for this bit so you can pick out how it's different for question 4. So again, if I just mark up here question 4 evaluation, you can see that's where the highlighter bits are. So any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Now, suddenly it does seem like it's worrying, because we said that it seems like the telescreen is human here. Well, now the telescreen is what is spying on him. It's able to pick things up, even though it's an inanimate object. So if we put a little note down here, I'll push my sheet right up. This is evidence then that this sort of society is being presented in a worrying light, because it seems like he's being spied on. We've also got this sense then that he's got no control. He has to speak in a very low whisper, and that's the only way he can kind of escape. So not only is he being spied on, but he seems to sort of lack control in some way. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. Now again, look at this language here that's being used to describe this telescreen. It's a metal plaque, but again, it seems almost human. It commands. It is in charge. It is in control. So now we've got a view of a society which is at the mercy of technology. Now that for us as a modern reader is quite an interesting point of view. So we can add here, he is at the mercy of technology. So whilst this society is maybe worrying in its presentation, for us as the reader, if you want to get into this really high marks, what is actually more worrying is the familiarity of this society, because we are at the mercy of technology, and actually this could easily happen to us because we do have devices that can transmit and receive simultaneously. And there have been cases of people being spied on through the use of technology. So if you really wanted to try and get into some of those high marks, what is most worrying about the way that society is being presented here is that for us as a modern reader, this actually has a much more realistic element than it would have done at the time that it was written. So, moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision that the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. Now, this is interesting as well, this extra phrase here. It doesn't need to say that. It could say there was no way of knowing. But the fact that there is, of course, no way of knowing almost suggests that they've had to accept this. So there's almost like, not necessarily as I said, put blind exception, but they've not had to accept it blindly. But they've had to accept the situation. So again, what we see here is they have no control. They're just having to accept the way that society is. And that, again, is worrying. So we're either, remember, looking for evidence that it is worrying or evidence for something else, so that we can say, yes, we agree with that, but we want to say, but we also think this, or actually we think something different. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you're being watched at any given moment. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. Now again, this is an interesting phrase here if we think about thought and police. Okay, we don't know what the thought police are. We don't have thought police, I hope, thank goodness. But these two words juxtaposed together, remember we're still trying to talk about methods, is really important. So I'm really running out of space. I'm going to kind of make a little arrow and make a note up here. So the idea that there are thought police is worrying. Remember, you're not just writing about language, you're writing about what you infer, really, about the writer's ideas, what the writer's trying to suggest. So the kind of juxtaposition of these two words is worrying. Thoughts are something that are private and personal, and they're being contrasted, so I've put versus, meaning like against, the idea of the police. Now the police are something that is very public and is about enforcement. So just the idea that there may be something like the thought police would be worrying, but you can then go into talking about the language here and this addition of the adjective thought to describe the police, a particular type of police, and what effect that has. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. So again, what is worrying here is this lack of predictability or certainty. You don't know what is coming at any given time. So people lack certainty as well as lacking freedom, and there's a lack of predictability. It was even conceivable that everybody watched everybody all the time, but at any rate you could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to did live, from the habit that became indistinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and even in the darkness, every movement scrutinized. So again, these kind of verbs here, that you're being scrutinized or that you're being overheard, also add to the sense that this is a worrying view of society where everybody is watched and spied on all the time. So now we're looking at the rest of it and still thinking about this idea of society being presented as worrying. So the fact that Winston has to keep his back to the television screen is definitely worrying. Even in his own home, he has to hide and be secretive. So the other thing then that is worrying here, if we try and explain that, is the lack of freedom that people seem to have. He also says it was safer though, as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. So even though he stood like that, he still feels like he's not completely safe. So again, this bit might be really important. You might want to write about this in terms of creating this sense that this is worrying because he feels like he's in danger. And again, he feels in danger even in his own home. This is a place that's supposed to be kind of like a sanctuary. It's supposed to be a place where we all feel safe. So the fact that he is being spied on even in his own home is worrying. Now, we've probably got lots that we could write about already, but there's lots that we could still pick up on in the rest of this paragraph. There's lots that we could say that is worrying about the presentation of the City of London here. We've got this building, his place of work, that's described as sort of vast and white, and later on it's described as glittering. And this creates a contrast against the grimy landscape. And then we've got this kind of this whole description here about how the rest of society live. Rotting 19th century houses, shored up with balks of timber, their windows patched with cardboards and roofs with corrugated iron. So we've got this sense of people trying to make do, which is in direct contrast with these other buildings here. And it seems to me that there is a real exaggerated contrast between rich and poor. I don't know how I was going to spell poor then. Between rich and poor, and a contrast between those who are in power and those who aren't. So you might want to look at that as well, particularly if if you want to kind of add your own ideas as well. Lots you can say about the language and the adjectives that are being used, and also about the sentence structure here, to kind of emphasize the way the poor are living, or the rest of society, the public, are living in comparison to the people in power. But I just want to finish off by focusing on two things. Firstly, another thing that I think is particularly worrying is Winston's trying to remember his past, and he can't even remember. So the fact that it was no use, he could not remember, that to me is kind of worrying, because it seems to me like he's almost not able to remember anymore because of this idea of the thought police, that he's losing his ability to use his mind in some way. So perhaps, and remember using these modal verbs, like saying maybe this is being suggested, perhaps this is suggested, perhaps what Orwell is implying here is that the presence of the thought police prevents people from, they become out of the habit of thinking or remembering anything. They essentially turn into zombies, because this image, this memory that he has no background and is mostly unintelligible. So he's kind of almost sort of turning into a kind of zombie who is incapable of free thought. And then finally, the other thing that I would say worrying these three slogans at the end. So it says that these are the three slogans of the party. So this really implies this idea of it being a political party. This is their belief statement. And the language here is very oxymoronic. Remember, oxymorons. Moronic. Oxymorons are where you've got two contrasting ideas right next to each other. So similar to juxtaposition, but the idea is that they are individual words. So war and peace are oxymoronic, freedom and slavery are oxymoronic. So what is worrying here is that really what this is implying is if war is peace, well, it's really saying that war is a good thing, because it's like what we think of peace. And it's also saying that ignorance is strength. So it's saying ignorance is a good thing. And that kind of thing links to this idea of that they don't want them to think anymore. So implies, if we say freedom and freedom of thought is no longer valued. And that essentially is what is the most worrying thing here, isn't it? Is because they're presenting a society where actually they want people to just go about their lives and go about their business without having an opinion or thinking anything, or just behaving like robots in some way. So I'm just going to note that there, that he almost wants them to well, not Orwell, he doesn't want them to be like robots, but this society that's being presented wants people to be like robots. Now, remember, we're not just having to say that we're agreeing with the fact that this is worrying. We might want to add our own view. So we might say, actually, this is not just worrying. This is actually really a terrifying view of society, and that fits in with the idea of this being a kind of dystopian novel, which is presenting us this kind of really horrendous sort of view of the world, like a different world that we could be living in, parallel universe. That's the phrase that I'm thinking of. Okay, so let's finish off on that point. So you've got plenty of notes there for writing about question 2, question 3, and question 4 when we look at them in lessons soon. Thanks for listening.